Hello and welcome to Connect MKE. I'm your host, Denise Calloway. Thank you for joining us this morning. February is Black History Month, a time when the special emphasis is placed on the contributions and accomplishments of African Americans over the past 400 years. For nearly 50 years, we've spent the month learning about famous and not so famous African Americans, but we still have things to learn about Black history, including Wisconsin's Black history. Joining us to celebrate Black History Month is Clayborn Benson, founding director of the Wisconsin Black Historical Society Museum, located at 26th and Center in Milwaukee. It is the only museum in the state dedicated to preserving and sharing Wisconsin's Black history. Thank you for being with us, Clayborn.
Thank you. It's an honor.
How did Black History Month start?
Dr. Carter G. Woodson, at the turn of the century, after graduating from Harvard University, decided that our people are about to go into the new century and we need to know more about ourselves. And so he started the Black History Week first, and then later Black History, it became Black History Month under the leadership of President Ford. And they run the organization ASALA, which had their convention here in Milwaukee some years back. But their convention takes place all over the United States once a year, all in an effort to preserve African American history.
Well, how has the celebration of Black History Month changed over the years?
Well, it really is going through a major change right now, to tell you the truth. I mean, obviously going from 1 week to a month, but to recognizing Juneteenth Day and recognizing Black History Month now, where almost every station encourages their employees to take on Black History stories. Companies are beginning to bring guest speakers like myself and others to talk about Black History Month. I think it's going through a revolution now. I think the biggest of the revolution is that people are beginning to learn about themselves and who they are and who their ancestors are and how did they make their passage through these many moments in times, historical moments, how they endured, survived, migration patterns, changing of languages, jobs, kids making changes and making their families. All of that is Black History Month and American history.
Do you think some of that, where people are more interested in learning about their own personal history, do you take that back to things like all of the there's Ancestry DNA, 23andMe, some things that make it possible now for people to have a deeper understanding of their own personal history?
The family search. And one of the hardest hurdles, and I've even heard it from you, is how do we trace our family back beyond 1870 when we appear on the census as a family? But prior to that, where then are we? Because we're supposedly unimportant and invisible. And if you look us up on the census, you will see William T. Johnson, the slave of William T. Johnson, 26 years old, thus and thus and thus. So that there are ways in which people can trace their family history beyond the 1870 census when we became real persons. My great-great-great-grandfather, Clayborn Massey, appears in the line of African Americans waiting to register the vote in 1868. The first time I see him and the last time I see him. But it's crucial. I mean, you could tell a major story and read the newspapers of that period. The expectation, the excitement of voting our ancestors went through, and they waited long lines to be able to vote. I'm able to trace my family back by finding them in a wheel. And an inventory of enslaved people being sold from a family in Charleston, South Carolina to Lancaster, South Carolina. And uh, and able to find the owner of them in Charleston, South Carolina, and look at the work in which my great grandfather did as he was he was a smith, and he carved headstones for cemeteries. And I could still find the work in which he did even today. So there are ways in which you can find your family beyond that 1870 census. And as you look at these target dates, you're able to see the passage of your family through various periods of civil war, epidemics, migrations in which they went through, the birth of children, the churches that they belong to. And your history is important. When I say that yours, I mean all of our history is fascinating and very exciting. All we need to do is take that pause to steady ourselves.
So what does that bring then to the personal acknowledgement of Black History Month when we are now able to go back through Family Search, through the DNA programs that are out there, the many different face groups that exist, for example, where people can connect with folks? What does that mean to Black history when there is that personal connection about ancestors who actually are part of that history?
It gives you a sense of pride and joy. I remember graduating from college, and the real ratification I needed, or the feeling of completion I needed, was to be able to find my family in history. And I was able to find that I had two sisters alive. Both of them were quite a bit older than I was, but to spend time with them. And I was able to spend 10 years with them of their life before they passed on. But it was a great joy, a sense of fulfillment. I then was able to see myself in the 1860s and the 1840s and 50s. I was able to see how it was as if my sister talked to me through the ancestors from heaven, as she talked to me and gave me advice and spent time with me. So that it gives you a sense of completion.
There's so much emphasis during Black History Month. I think perhaps not as much, but still more than maybe we'd like to see, of young people learning about well-known individuals in Black history. That's important. Yeah. How important is it for people to also learn the stories of everyday people whose work and lives shaped Black history, American history?
We call them ordinary people. We call them regular people. People have done so much. And so the woman behind me, Mrs. Audie Halyard, a woman called Mrs. Bernice Lindsay, who takes a delegation of African-American men and women to the Congo, West Africa, in the mid-60s, who is invited to the White House by President Kennedy to talk about women issues. And from Milwaukee, a woman who builds and creates a subdivision in 47th and Stock, just north, for returning veterans. A woman who recognized the city of Milwaukee refused to build houses for African Americans, apartment houses as they have now, and builds a apartment complex over on 4th and Reservoir. My point is, and she does not at all want to be recognized and raised above any kind of level. Clearly, there are people who are and have done great accomplishments. It's in the flavor of the masses rather than these highlighted people. And you have to know that there are forces that encourage us and tell us to support and to admire these certain people rather than the people who have actually done the real work.
When we take a look at Black History Month, one thing that people will say is, how do I learn more about Black history? Are there some things that are coming up, and are there some things that you are doing at the Wisconsin Black Historical Society Museum that really can help people get information?
We have programs all the time. We have exhibits. We have guests coming in for various programs and activities. So yes, we do have things in which, and you can go to our website to learn more about it and see those things in which we have. I think probably obviously the most important thing is our annual genealogy conference in which we encourage and support people about learning about themselves. That's really the most important thing. I mean, year round we can learn about people. And then the other real important is we're doing an exhibit right now on the Black Cross nurses, taken from the term the Red Cross. At the turn of the century under the Marcus Garvey movement. Marcus Garvey visited Milwaukee supporting the Black Cross nurses. They came here just like we're going through the COVID epidemic now. The tuberculosis epidemic was a major crisis that we were going through. And we didn't get the kind of support from the hospitals and nurses, white nurses and white doctors, to visit our homes to help us through those periods of COVID and tuberculosis. And so that the Black Cross nurses organized and they went into people's homes and treated them. They went down to train stations, and when people came in, they gave them inoculations, preventing them from catching tuberculosis. They did all sorts of things to heal our spirits and our souls. And so we're doing an exhibit on one. Malcolm X lived in Milwaukee as a young kid for a short period of time. Marcus Garvey visited Milwaukee and brought attention to the Black Cross nurses. And then more specifically, we're focusing on this woman by the name of Hattie Fountain. Her and her husband, he was a car salesman, and she was a trained nurse and a member of the UNIA Black Cross nurses.
As you were telling us, there is so much to learn about Black History Month. One question before we start to dive a little bit into some of that history we need to know about Wisconsin's Black history is when there's that concentration in February on Black history, how do we make sure that the efforts, the contributions are interwoven into history the other 11 months of the year?
Well, I always say find myself in it. I mean, we've been talking about this for the last 20 minutes, this idea of finding yourself into history, or history simply means his story or her story. And all of us have a history. And whereas we don't need to look up other people's history, we can look up our own history. And any book you read, any good book really refers to their particular history and how they maneuvered in it. There are all sorts of interesting little stories that you can, if you wanted to venture outside of learning about yourself, learn about local people, learn about historical locations. I went to Washington, D.C. recently for a funeral and ended up going to the Smithsonian African American Museum and spent a great deal of time walking through it and listening to some of the comments of people. All at the same time, I visited Gucci Land, which was a slave owner who owned on my grandmother's side her ancestors, and they were called Gooch, Gooch, Gooch. And you can see variations of that name even today. They were Southerners, and they moved throughout the South. We were Gooch. I also, what else? I went down to Thomas Jefferson's home. Yeah, I went to and visited that and learned about Jefferson, because there are Jeffersons that were in Wisconsin.
Yes.
John Jefferson and Beverly Jefferson that lived in the Madison area. John Jefferson commanded the 8th Wisconsin and was victorious in the Tennessee.
There is a lot more to learn about Black history in Wisconsin, including the Jeffersons, and also Black history here in Milwaukee. So coming up in just a minute, we are going to learn more about that history. So please stay with us. Welcome back to Connect MKE. As we've been learning, there is a rich Black history in this country, and Wisconsin has its own story to tell, even though most of us don't know much about it. Helping us learn more is Clayborn Benson, founding director of Wisconsin's Black Historical Society Museum here in Milwaukee. Before we dive into learning more about some of Wisconsin's Black history, tell us about the history of the Wisconsin Black Historical Society Museum. How did it start?
Well, I would like to say that I started in 1988 as a news cameraman and having a great love for history. But I would honestly tell you that the love for history is woven in the fabric of my life from the very beginning. And from my father all the way through my life, I've always had this gravitation to being interested in history. Not doing very well in high school, uh, I didn't think it was possible to say that I could retain much of this history and even graduate from college as an honor student. But once I got into the groove of understanding what my mission on this earth was, I did very well and excelled. So I'm honored to have and honored to be in this business of history and retaining it. Thank you for asking that question.
Of course, of course. Most of us really don't know about much about some of Milwaukee and Wisconsin's earliest Black settlers. Who were some of those earliest Black settlers to Wisconsin?
Well, African Americans have been in the state since the very beginning, when it was merely a territory. As trappers and guides, as frontiersmen, we were very active. We had an excellent relationship with the Native Americans, and we navigated our ways up and down the rivers that wind to make the state what it is. So yeah, we've been here since, and long before it was a territory, and long before it became a state. African Americans were here, so we played a major role. But the little significant things like Joe Oliver, who is an African American here early on, voted in 1835. It was not legal for African Americans to vote at that period of time, and his fellow comrades acknowledged that, but still gave him the nod to vote. African Americans gained the right to vote in 1866. But voting is such a very important issue in terms of making a determination of your outcome. So then in 1848, the founding fathers of the state put voting on the referendum and the Constitution, saying that African Americans should vote. However, it did not pass, and it was taken out. In 1848, the state became a state. Now, this seems kind of long-winded, and I don't mean to talk you to death, but African Americans fought for the right to vote. And in 1849, they put on a referendum and to really challenge that question: can we have the right to vote? And yes, it was denied once again. A man by the name of Ezekiel Gillespie founded St. Mark's AME Church on 16th and Atkinson, took the matter to court in 1865, and the state Supreme Court ruled that African Americans had the right since the 1849 referendum. There's a lot of talk about the 1849 referendum, but having the right to vote was in that, and those people who voted in that election clearly was cheated out of the opportunity to vote. We had the right to vote, and the calculations of that outcome said no.
You mentioned
Someone added wrongly. That is the point that I was making with that.
right.
Thank you.
Of course.
Mhm.
You mentioned Mr. Gillespie here in Milwaukee,
Yes,
but there were other folks who were
yes,
settling
lots.
other parts of Wisconsin.
We are the only state to defy the fugitive slave law, which is a law, the Great Compromise of 1850 between the North and the South. The South is upset because North is helping runaways make their way to Canada, and thus the South is expanding to the West. Let's come together and make a compromise. And with Ezekiel Gillespie escaping from Missouri, coming to Wisconsin, The moment that many historians talk about as the breaking out of Joshua Glover from the jail and sending him to Racine and then eventually to Canada is it's Wisconsin defying the fugitive slave law. Wisconsin defying a federal law put in effect by Congress, and Wisconsin defies that law. But there are many other real important contributions that the state makes in a national perspective. The uh, Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal. It never was equal. Brown versus the Board of Education, saying that indeed Black kids should be able to get an equal education. And they find out 3 years later, indeed, they were not getting a free education. This is a national fight put together by Lord Bobby, sitting attorney in Milwaukee. The Supreme Court gave him the nod to fight this fight, and that indeed he does fight it and wins that they were cheating on Brown versus the Board of Education, and all over the country of the United States had to make changes to accommodate African Americans kids getting an equal education. The fair housing legislation. Martin Luther King tried desperately in the Chicago area to get fair housing passed and was not successful. His father, James Groppe, and Val Phillips, and the commandos who fought diligently through the streets of Milwaukee to get national attention about fair housing. It's such a complicated subject. Uh, 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 Restricted covenances, mortgages, interest rates, all of these things block and prevent African Americans from moving into quality homes and out of segregated areas. Yet, if you ask them, they would still find we live in a segregated area. But legislation is passed because of the efforts of Father James Groppe and those people that I mentioned.
You know, one of the things I've always found so interesting about Wisconsin is that so much of the African American population is centered in our cities and urban communities. But it
Yes.
wasn't always that way. I know you've told me about Black farmers outside of the southeastern Wisconsin.
Yeah, we live in a segregated environment, and you can see that segregation in Milwaukee. But if you look closely, you'll see that African Americans are moving all over the state in various locations. Beaver Dam in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and Madison, Wisconsin, and Burlington. There are African Americans. We're seeing Kenosha. There are African Americans living everywhere. And some of the ways you can see that is during Juneteenth Day, you can see celebrations of our freedom, our fight for freedom in these various little locations throughout the Appleton, Wisconsin. You see it in a place called Friedman, Wisconsin. All over the state, you see African Americans in little nest eggs around the state, mostly in the eastern part of the state, not so much in the western part of the state. But we do La Crosse, Eclair. I mean, there are African Americans everywhere in the state, mostly populated areas.
Are there some parts of Wisconsin's Black history that have been forgotten?
Yes, the story about Black nurses that I just mentioned to you has is a story that has been gotten. Also, have been changed. I mean, you can see that in the idea of calling the old Walnut Street area, uh, uh, calling it Bronzeville, but Little Africa. We lived in the southern part of the city. I mean, real south. I'm talking about around by MATC, the Leach Street. Uh, uh, Far west is 20th Street on State Street, even on Wisconsin Avenue. Those areas uh, clearly do not look like African American communities today, um, but they have been forgotten. And you would find a difference in how people they don't view us living in those particular areas, but we did live in those areas. We did, and there were people who had a great deal of money in those areas. John Slaughter, for example. I'm not talking about little money. I'm not talking about good money now. I'm talking about a lot of money. Who had businesses and encouraged and supported others to. He had so much money that he played the ponies. He owned a horse. That was how much he had, and they just took all his money out of him. Anyway, there were some interesting characters. Um, Mr. Bill Mosley. Bill Mosley ran the docks. We had the longshoreman. He started from cleaning the hull of the ship up and became a union president and encouraged his colleagues to join the union, and they virtually ran the docks. Now we know how important transportation is for southeastern Wisconsin and even farther north into Wisconsin. Supplies come from the docks and goes to supply. That was a major mode of transportation. Bill Mosley ran all the 1960s. He was kingpin on the longshoremen and the docks. The president of the docks had to call him up to see if he'd get it done. I'm
Yeah,
telling you.
one thing that has always fascinated me is the story of Lake Ivanhoe,
Yes.
which a lot of people don't really know about. Tell us about Lake Ivanhoe.
So Lake Ivanhoe is an African American community started in the 1920s. A group of four men from Chicago made their way up to, I'm not sure if it's three or four, made their way up from Chicago, and they wanted a resort area for Chicagoans to come and rest during the summer months. They had just gone through a riot of some sort, and thus they identified Lake Ivanhoe. It had an excellent lake there, and it wanted to emulate that of Lake Geneva, and so that they wanted to have recreation and such in that area, and they did, and it still does exist. The State Historical Society just acknowledged them as being a historical spot and location. But I would say to you that Lake Ivanhoe is the second city founded in the state of Wisconsin. Um, Chilton is the first city founded in the state of Wisconsin by African Americans. Moses Stanton and his wife, who was Oneida, and they settled in the Brotherton area, and he founded what was called Stantonville, and it's called Chilton today, on Highway 57 up towards Green Bay.
Clayborn, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
You have shown us that there is Black history throughout Wisconsin. All we have to do is look for it. And we encourage people to take time this month and throughout the year to visit Wisconsin Black Historical Society. Learn more on the website at wbhsm.org.
Right.
Thanks for being with us, Clayborn. Have a
Thank
great
you.
week, everyone, and we'll see you again next weekend.